Hi, my name is Mark Silver, and we're continuing on this series of videos specifically for parents who have children with borderline personality disorder. Um, Clearly, the symptoms, the presentation of someone with borderline personality disorder is depressing. You have a child and you have hopes and dreams, and the child has all these issues. And what I want to talk about today, just for a few minutes, is something which I think is absolutely crucial, and that is it's important to remember that there is a beautiful and wonderful human being inside, and that that individual has the possibility for creativity and personal development, growth, and so on. And at every opportunity, it's important to support and suggest and encourage your child to engage in hobbies, activities, and interests. This could be sports or athletics. It could be music, either playing music or getting involved in different genres of music, writing music. It could involve all sorts of things in the arts. Um, Encourage your child and look for hidden talents. Look for the beautiful. Look for the positive in your child. It's there. It was probably there before your child started to show signs of borderline personality disorder, and it's there now. Additionally, as we grow and develop, we also grow and develop new talents, right? Just like a an infant grows and has more abilities in functioning with regard to dexterity, perhaps, of their fingers, crawling, and through the earlier years of development. Similarly, children in their adolescence, mid adolescence, late adolescence, adulthood, and so on, grow into all sorts of creative individuals. And, the kid who, really hated reading, for example, not only becomes a voracious reader, but journals and is able to express themselves in a written form that allows for difficult thoughts and feelings to get on paper, which may be therapeutic, but may also suggest that this person really has a possible career as a writer. Poems or novels, or perhaps as a journalist. Um, Similarly, you see a lot of kids, especially with the channels now, who do cooking. And it's a fantastically creative outlet. You have to figure out recipes. You have to compare and contrast recipes that, you may have 20 or 30 different kinds of recipes you find on the internet. You have to look for not only ingredients, but good quality ingredients that are fresh, put them together. There's the responsibility involved. There's the, positive self-esteem of creating a dish, putting it together, presenting it in a beautiful way, having the family or their friends enjoy really good quality food. These are all sorts of creative outlets that need to be encouraged. And all the more so, as I said at the beginning, for borderlines, because there's so many negative aspects attached to it that when the individual finds creativity, it needs to be encouraged. Sometimes, especially with adolescents, they feel so down on themselves, not just for psychological and emotional reasons that are obvious, but perhaps in terms of how they see themselves, their body image, um, in terms of interpersonal challenges with friends and peers and so on. It becomes all the more important especially if they're isolated, to have these talents. One of the great things about the internet now, for example, is that you can have a talent and interact with people that are not in your home or community and exchange ideas and issues. There are a million different kinds of YouTube instructions on cooking and building and, um, music and sewing and knitting and so on. I fool around a little bit with the guitar and piano. And I was amazed when the internet started. You had apps to tune your guitar. I'm terrible at tuning guitar. But I remember when my daughters were playing the ukulele, it allowed them all this interaction with expert players who had different styles and came from different parts of the world and had their own personal stories. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here. With creativity, when you look for hidden talents and strengths, and the person develops abilities in these areas, you also develop a very different narrative for the borderline child. Rather than having a narrative that's just based on symptoms, which is so negative, rather than having a narrative that is based only on problems and negative issues in the school and the community and so on, you can have a new narrative based on something that's positive or even multiple positive things. And it gives the child a very different perspective on their identity. And it gives the parents and siblings a very different perspective on the borderline child's personality. It's so important to balance the negative, unfortunate aspects and criteria of the disorder with the very, very best parts of who that individual is in a loving and a caring and supportive way. And, children, they really surprise you, right? I mean, sometimes you see a child who does not seem to have any particular outstanding abilities or talents, and they, get into adolescence or late adolescence, and they become interested in something that they seem to have no particular desire or care for or attraction to at all in earlier years. And not only do they become involved, they become quite adept and may even become quite expert in that area of their particular interest. There are a million hobbies and interests, and try to figure out perhaps your child's proclivities and likes and dislikes, and sometimes some issues that seem quite that the child seems quite uninterested in. Actually, the child may become quite interested in. You have a child who seems to do absolutely no sports or athletics whatsoever, but they just find that one thing in sports or athletics that for whatever reason they really get into, and they run with it and they really develop it. It's also important that the child needs to be encouraged in this way. The child doesn't have to become, the first violinist in the New York Philharmonic, right? The child doesn't have to become the quarterback on the high school football team. It's more than sufficient that the child gains personal self-satisfaction from their endeavor and that it helps their self-esteem. It's also very important that these endeavors that are positive redirect them away from negative thoughts, negative feelings, and negative behaviors. One of the great things about being an athlete in high school or young adult is that you really have to respect your body and you have to take care of it. And a lot of these people end up eating well. They ensure they get enough sleep. And many of these people really make a concerted effort to avoid drugs and alcohol because their bodies, if they could tolerate it at all prior to being an athlete, they really feel how it negatively impacts them. So many of these hobbies and interests also feed into a healthier lifestyle. Another issue related to this is just time. A lot of people with these kinds of issues and problems and disorders have a time management problem. We'll get to ADHD at another time, but by that I mean there's a lot of people who feel very badly about themselves and they stay in their rooms or they're isolated, and all that time you're stewing thinking about your own problems, you're obsessing about them in an almost OCD kind of way. And it's really not healthy at all. And what you find is a lot of people waste a lot of time feeling sorry for themselves and throwing pity partying for themselves and so on. One of the great things about these hobbies and activities is that they're time consuming. So the child, for example, that, does a sport that requires 3 or 4 days a week of dedication, and, each time it's maybe 90 minutes or 2 hours, and you travel to and you travel from the place where the person's doing the athletics or whatnot. It's very time consuming, and it allows a good chunk of the person's week at different intervals during the week to be redirected in a really healthy way. Even simple things like cooking. Kids that take up these hobbies, you have to get the right ingredients. You have to go to different stores. You have to put it together. It takes an hour or more to cook sometimes, and you have to wait for the dish to properly bake, and you have to check on it. You have to be very diligent. You have to be very careful and caring and considerate, and it's very, very time consuming. The other thing about these hobbies and activities is that they're very cognitively consuming. And by that I mean it's important to understand that, especially with things like depression, when you're an anxiety, when your mind is preoccupied in a healthy way, it's very difficult to be preoccupied in an unhealthy way. And one of the examples I give is, if you have a tune in your head, you just, sometimes we get a tune in our head, you just can't get it out. Sing another tune. I know it sounds simplistic, but if you sing Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you can't also sing Happy Birthday tune. Even if it's in your head, if you, sing in your head Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, you can't also sing in your head Happy Birthday tune. It's not quite clear why this is, but we can't have two things at the same time. In fact, there's really interesting research. There was this whole period a couple of years ago on multitasking. And one of the things we found out through some of the research is that multitasking is actually not very effective. It doesn't work very well. I can speak for myself. When I'm working on a case on my computer, I have my door shut. I don't have the air conditioning on. I never have music in the background. And if a client calls about a question, I put down what I'm doing completely and I focus on something else. Borderline adolescents really benefit from having a particular focus, which allows their concentration on very negative thoughts to be quelled, even if it's only for 1 or 2 or 3 hours. So there are behavioral benefits from hobbies and activities. There's cognitive or thinking benefits, and there are emotional or psychological benefits as well. And all of these things cumulatively allow the borderline to consider a different lifestyle. Because if it's a hobby or activity with regard to, music, or the arts or sports or athletics, it allows the borderline to consider that they can have a different kind of life, that they can have a life that's enjoyable, where they focus on healthy activities that provide important feedback, boosting their self-esteem, and allowing them to live safe and healthy. Because for the most part, all of these hobbies and activities are safe and healthy, right? And it allows them to consider that as an alternate lifestyle. Parents need to be very encouraging about this. Sometimes it involves spending time with the child, developing these hobbies and activities. Sometimes it involves monetary support. Sometimes it involves emotional or psychological support. Sometimes it's just encouragement when the child is, for example, knitting and or cooking or does whatever a particular artwork, oil or pastel or whatever a particular artwork they show to you. Say, that's wonderful. You spend 3 hours on this. You produce something beautiful. You have done something beautiful. It shows and reflects your inner beauty, your abilities, your strengths, and your assets. And that's what we want to encourage. We want at the very most fundamental level to encourage encouragement. We want the borderline to have the ability to see and envision a positive future for themselves, a future where they're involved with things and feelings and thoughts and emotions that benefit their lives. Because you can either go down a route that is self-destructive, or you can go down a route which is positive and healthy. And we all know that the healthy and positive route is what the parents want, but deep down it's what the borderline wants as well. I'm not saying that this will completely eliminate all destructive and harmful tendencies for the borderline, but the borderline needs to understand that there are possibilities of safe and healthy behaviors that can provide them a very positive and loving and wonderful life. And if that outshines the negative, then there's a lot of hope for the borderline child as that person grows into adulthood, and a lot of hope for the parents of the child.